Hello, welcome to this talk about writing agentless types and providers with the Resource API. During this session, we will show you how to use the PDK and the Resource API to create types and providers to manage infrastructure that has no Puppet agent. My name is Davin Hanlon. I'm a product manager on the modules and network automation teams at Puppet.
And I'm David Schmidt. I'm the principal software engineer on the network team, and I've been writing modules for longer than I want to admit.
Okay, David, so I know all about writing or about using the Puppet agent to manage infrastructure. So I install an agent on that piece of infrastructure and I can manage it. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about Agentless Puppet and how that works?
Sure. So as you said, for regular Puppet, you need an agent installed on the machine you want to manage. But for many devices out there, like if you have an old iOS switch, you cannot install an agent. There is no agent, and even if there were one, it wouldn't work because there is no place to install it. So Agentless Puppet now takes the same concepts that you know from regular Puppet, both running as an agent or running as a command line tool, and wraps it in a framework where you can enforce your desired state on a remote device.
Okay, and that uses the Puppet device framework.
Yeah.
So can you maybe tell us a little bit about that framework, please?
Sure. Puppet device is a command that drives all of that, and it comes straight up with your Puppet agent installed. And I've got just a regular Puppet agent installed here on my workstation, and I can give you a sneak peek on the help here. On your proxy agent, you would configure all the devices in a special configuration file with their credentials, and then you can select --target, the device you want to talk to. In the normal run, it works like an agent, gets the catalog from the Puppet master and pushes out those changes. But you also have the apply modes or the --resource, where you can pass in a type and just list out the existing resources as you would do with the regular Puppet resource command.
Right, okay. So a Puppet device can work with modules that contain types and providers to manage remote infrastructure without an agent. So can you tell me a little bit about types and providers? What are they?
Yeah. To give you an example, I've got a firewall configured here. And we can have a quick look at one of the types on one of the resources on that firewall, and I just say resource panels admin, and that will list all the administrative users on that firewall. That is a Palo Alto firewall for which we just built a module for, and you can see here. The panel's admin resource has a couple of attributes like ensure, which should be very familiar, like absent present, string for the password hash, and booleans for certificate only. And the sum of all those attributes is really the type of that resource. Okay. On the other hand, behind that is the provider that then has all the code bits that connect the Palo Alto firewall API with Puppet and facilitates that data exchange.
Okay, very good. So this is obviously relying on types and providers within Puppet. So there is a statistic that only 10% of modules on the Forge contain custom types and providers. Can you give a bit of insight as to why that may be the case?
Yeah. So types and providers have been one of the first components of Puppet overall because they're so core to the concept of what Puppet is. And there have been several books written on the topic on how to write types and providers. There is Gary Larissa's excellent blog series on the practical side of all of that. I've been working in that space for quite a few years now, and still people come to me, David, could we have better documentation about how to write types and providers? Which makes me think it's not the documentation that's the problem here.
Right. And so I guess in response to that, I mean, you created the resource API and the PDK. So do you want to tell us how you can use the PDK and the resource API for types and providers?
Sure. The resource API is a quite small piece of code that acts as a facade in front of the regular types and providers of Core Puppet, or the regular types and providers infrastructure of Core Puppet, I should say, and exposes a much easier and to understand and to explain front end to tell Puppet about your resource that you're caring about. In the same way, the providers that you write for the resource API are plain Ruby classes. You do not have to touch any of Puppet's innards for them to make the work. The only two methods that you need to implement on those is get, which returns a list of resources that exist out there on the target, and set, which gets information from Puppet to enforce a desired state on the device that you're talking to.
All right, that sounds pretty straightforward. So could you maybe walk us through a module and maybe some types and providers just to show us what they look like in code, please?
Sure. We talked already about the Palo Alto module, and as it happens, I have a checkout of that here, and I'll load it up in the Visual Code Studio with the Puppet plugin. And here we have all the types that are part of that module and that represent things that you can manage on your Palo Alto firewall. And taking here into the Panos admin, it's a single method call that takes a fixed data structure that describes all of your type. You have the name, you have the attributes that can contain Puppet 4 data types to describe the data that is valid for each attribute. For example, one thing that was always very difficult to implement with the regular types and provider API was things like Boolean. Here it is just a regular Puppet 4 data type, no hassle at all. You can specify a default of false, and it just works out. If observant viewers will note that there's some XPath stuff going on here. This is specific to the Palo Alto module, since the Palo Alto API itself is XML, which people might have opinions about, but we could crisp it up here so that we have the XPath pointers into those structures here, and it just works out of the box. Well, out of the box, given the little bits of pieces of code that we have in the backend to hook all of that up. And here is the Panos admin provider that contains the Panos admin specific code, which is mostly building XML so that we can talk back to the API. In the Palo Alto case, since we have so many providers that all talk to a very uniform API, we do have a common base provider that has the get method and a create and an update method and also a delete method. And all of those methods only call out to the device that is configured in the infrastructure of Puppet, and we use the base XPath that is written on the that is declared on the type to get the information from the API, and then there's a few lines of code to pretty it up so that Puppet actually can work with it.
Okay, so that seems reasonably straightforward. That's obviously an existing module that has a whole bunch of code in there. Can you maybe walk me through the commands as to how I actually create a new type and provider using the PDK? The Panos module is already set up for that, and there's not much going on there to make that happen. You only need to run PDK new provider, and then the name of your type, Panos Hue, just to make an example here, and it will create all the files that you need to start writing your types and providers. It has a skeleton for the type, a skeleton for the provider, as well as unit test files to get you started on being able to exercise your code within
a very quick and easy way to run your tests without actually having to have a device available during development.
All right, cool. So let's say I'm a developer. Okay, I've written this module. I've created types and I've used the PDK to create types and providers that use the resource API. I've tested it. I'm all comfortable with it. How do I go about deploying it? What's the recommended approach that I should take?
So the easy part of that is just deploying that module as that pandas module in this case, as you would deploy any other module in your environments. You can use the code manager for Puppet Enterprise, or if you're using the open source edition, you already have something in place depending on your setup. For the proxy agent itself, you need to configure the individual devices that should be managed by that proxy agent with their credentials, and for that we do have the Puppet Labs device manager module that is supported if you have a Puppet Enterprise license, and it provides you with all the tools to set up and push out your credentials to proxy agents as you have them in your infrastructure.
Okay, great. Okay, then so to sum up, if I'm a modules developer and I want to manage some infrastructure with Puppet that doesn't have an agent on it, so an agentless management, I should create a module using the PDK, of course, use the resource API for my types and providers, and then deploy it using the device manager. Is that correct?
And that's it. We're 10 minutes in, and we have told you everything you need to know to get started.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for your time. We hope you enjoyed the session. If you do have any questions or any follow-up, please feel free to reach out to us. We can be found hanging around Slack, or just drop an email into the Puppet user groups. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.